Early breakfast on Times Radio. Good morning to you. Monday morning. Thanks very much for being with us. Thanks for checking in. More of your texts and emails to come. Before that, the government wants to use the homes of sanctioned Russian oligarchs to house Ukrainian refugees. The Housing Secretary says that properties that aren't being used by ultra-wealthy Russians could be adopted for humanitarian purposes. Portia Berry-Kilby joins us this morning, political commentator and contributor to Young Voices UK. Good morning, Portia.
Morning, Callum. Thanks for having me on.
It's our pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. Right, is it time to give up the oligarch mansions and give them to refugees, Ukrainians who make their way to the UK?
Well, I mean, Gove concedes that there are significant legal barriers in the way with this. And to be quite honest, not least of these should be the UK's speed at processing visa applications. I think that's really the first barrier. And while there is something rather satisfying about not only sanctioning Russia, but also putting Russian assets to the service of Ukrainians, I think the government shouldn't bypass the actions of civil society and businesses such as Airbnb in this regard at providing housing. There's not always the need for the government to step in and offer a solution when you have willing people across the country who are happy to give over their homes and spare rooms to Ukrainians. The real barrier is getting them in the country in the first place.
Well, I mean, yes, that is a valid point. You know, in terms of finding rooms, actually, you have to find a way in. First of all, as a Ukrainian refugee, there is kind of announcement, more detail, I suppose, expected today on what the government is proposing to change, including, by the way, giving payments to people who house refugees in perhaps their spare room or whatever, and also a kind of feeling of moving away, I guess, from the bureaucracy, the red tape that's holding up refugees from coming to the UK as well. I just wonder, do you feel like the government is being generous here? It's worth noting that this has taken a good 2.5 weeks to even reach this point since war broke out, where comparatively other countries have been immediately more generous.
That's very true. And it is kind of embarrassing when you look at the certain European states' responses to the situation. Maybe it's not necessarily a matter of generosity, but simple efficiency at this point in time. And understandably, there's some red tape, and one argument would be to do away with all of it. But there definitely has to be done away with some of it at this point to speed up the process. That's undeniable.
Yeah. Very interesting. Well, we'll keep an ear out for more detail through today. Let's just step away from Ukraine briefly for a couple of other stories this morning as well, Portia. Lessons on misogyny should be taught in primary schools to stop inappropriate behaviour turning into violence against women and girls. This is coming from Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. I mean, his campaign is against sexist attitudes, urges men to oppose misogyny. Adverts here, have a word with yourself, then your mates. In principle, this is not a bad idea. How about extending these sorts of lessons into primary schools?
Well, I am often perplexed, Callum, at when did we stop teaching basic respect for our fellow humans? I don't think a 6-year-old boy needs to be taught about misogyny if he's being taught about respect. And I think ultimately, like Sadiq Khan admits that this came following the awful murder of Sarah Everard. But we do need to remember there is a difference between a misogynist and a murderer. And if you have someone at age 11 sexually harassing a girl, which apparently this article claims in the Times today, then there's something bigger going on. And it's not just misogyny at play, but just a basic lack of respect for other people and probably an over-sexualization of culture and people at a younger age.
Elsewhere as well, reported in the Times then, just to mention another story on the go today, degree grade inflation puts the 2-2 in danger of extinction. Only a few of the degrees now being awarded at some institutions, and this is because of because of grade inflation. I mean, is anyone going to miss the 2-2, Portia? Let's be honest.
Well, I definitely wouldn't want to have been awarded a 2-2, and I don't think anyone does. But unfortunately, someone has to be, because otherwise you're churning out more people than ever with degrees for a start, and then more people than ever with 2-1 or first. Ultimately, there shouldn't be anything shameful about a 2-2, let alone even a third. But there just has to be a way of distinguishing between a whole group of people coming out of university, and now you have jobs requiring masters when really there's no specialism required for the job. But if everyone has a first, there has to be some other distinguishing factor.
Indeed. Very interesting indeed. Portia, thank you very much for joining us. Nice to cover off a few stories with you this morning as well. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Callum.
That's Portia Berry-Kilby, political commentator and contributor to Young Voices UK.